Hey folks, we're going to be reading chapter 9 of Animal Farm. There's only 10 chapters, so we're getting towards the end. Last time we had the Battle of the Windmill. Frederick invaded with his men, and the animals put him to flight, but not before he destroyed the windmill completely. The pigs have characterized it as a great victory, despite the fact that they lost the windmill and a lot of animals in the process. Napoleon gave himself a new award. The Order of the Green Ribbon or whatever, and so now he's a war hero. The only damage that he took, though, was a slight nick to his tail. Let's see other important things from that chapter. The pigs discovered a case of whiskey and got drunk. Napoleon was hungover the next morning. Everybody thought he was dying. And then he decided that, drinking would have the death penalty, but very, very much recovered the next day and decided to buy books and equipment for brewing and distilling and to start planting barley. And then the commandment that no animal shall drink alcohol has been changed to no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. So now we have the last commandment sort of falling completely. And I guess no animal shall wear clothes. Yeah, and maybe there's another one. I suppose I should go back. Let's go back real quick, and we'll go through the 7 commandments before we start this thing off. So whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Obviously, that's been broken. We've got Whymper coming and being involved. We also got Napoleon dealing with Pilkington and Frederick at various times, trying to make allies. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. This is obviously not true anymore since Snowball is an enemy, but also since a lot of animals have been declared enemies and executed. No animal shall wear clothes. They wear medals and things like that, but we also saw Napoleon come jumping out of the farmhouse wearing a hat. Do those count as clothes? I mean, it seems clear that they do because Boxer burned his hat at the beginning thinking that it represented clothes and was against the commandments. But no, they're not wearing full outfits yet. No animal shall sleep in a bed while all the animals went into the farmhouse, which, if you remember, was declared that it would always be a museum and that no one should ever live there. And they all sleep in beds under blankets, but they added with sheets at the end of that. So that one's clearly broken. No animal shall drink alcohol. That fell last chapter. No animal shall kill any other animal. That was, ended a while ago. And all animals are equal. Clearly it's not. So the entire code by which animalism is supposed to be preserved has been broken systemically by the pigs, but all the animals still think they're living under animalism. They still think that this is the form of government that they're under. And we'll have to see how that concludes here in chapter 9. However, before we jump into chapter 9, here's a question that maybe I've mentioned in a Zoom meeting already. But one of the interesting things about Animal Farm is what happens when you get down to the question of protagonist. Who is the protagonist of this story? It's kind of a nut to crack for many. Like they sit and you think about it and you're like, who is the protagonist of the story? Clearly the antagonist of the story. Well, it started out being Jones, but over time it's become Napoleon, and I think everybody's on board. So who's opposed to Napoleon in the story? Who's the protagonist? There isn't one. There is no single protagonist. In fact, the protagonist of the story as a whole is the animals. The animals as a group. The story is told from the perspective of the animals. So we're given the information that the animals were given. We're given the sort of lines and stuff that Squealer gives to the animals. And what's interesting is from the narrative perspective, the animals keep believing Squealer and they don't have any way to reject it. But as a reader, you have a wider understanding and you can see what Squealer is doing. And you're like, no, that's not. But your narrator is understanding things as the animals understand them, and the animals as a whole ends up being your protagonist. Of the animals, the most prominent is probably Boxer, who's starting out this chapter. And that's probably because Boxer represents the animals as a whole. He represents the working class. All right, without further ado, we're gonna jump into chapter 9, second to last chapter of Animal Farm, and see what happens today. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started their rebuilding of the windmill the day after the victory celebrations were ended. Boxer refused to take even a day off work and made it a point of honor not to let it be seen that he was in pain. Pause. Again, Orwell loves to do this. We have intentional contrasts and juxtaposition. At the end of the last chapter, Napoleon took a day off work because he was hungover. And he put out that he was dying because he was in pain. Contrast this to a boxer who actually got hurt and won't take a day off work and won't let people know he's in pain. In the evenings, he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with poultices of herbs, which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she said to him. But Boxer would not listen. He had, he said, only one real ambition left, to see the windmill well underway before he reached the age of retirement. At the beginning, when the laws of Animal Farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions had been agreed upon. As yet, no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more. Now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley, it was rumored that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. For a horse, it was said, the pension would be 5 pounds of corn a day, and in winter 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in late summer the following year. Meanwhile, life was hard. The winter was cold as the last one had been, and food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced except those of the pigs and the dogs. Note the exception here. A too rigid equality in rations, Squealer explained, was contrary to the principles of animalism. Hold up. That makes no sense. The principle of animalism is all animals are equal. How does Squealer explain that? Well, remember, he can turn black into white with his words. In any case, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearances might be. For the time being, certainly it had been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment, never a reduction. But in comparison with the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips than they had had in Jones's day, that they worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was of better quality, that they lived together, that the larger proportion of the young ones survived infancy, and that they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from fleas. The animals believed every word of it. Truth to tell, Jones and all he stood for almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, that they were often hungry and often cold, and that they were usually working when they were not asleep, but doubtless it had been worse in the old days. They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days they had been slaves, and now they were free, and that made all the difference, as Squealer did not fail to point out. So are they better off now than they were in Jones's day? I mean, if we go back and read the beginning of the book, are things better now or worse? There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the 4 sows had all littered about simultaneously, producing 31 young pigs between them. The young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boar on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced that later, when the bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the time being, the young pigs were given their instructions by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchen. They took their exercise in the garden and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. Pause. Why are they discouraged from playing with the other young animals? Is it because they're higher class than the other young animals? And what's the difference between that and humans? Or that and a nobility versus a peasantry? Let's see. About this time, too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal met on the path, the other animal must stand aside, and also that all pigs, of whatever degree, were to have the privilege of wearing green ribbons on their tails on Sundays. The farm had been a fairly it's awkwardly written, but who am I to judge? The farm had had a fairly successful year, but was still short of money. There were the bricks, sand, and lime for the schoolroom to be purchased, and it would also be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery for the windmill. Then there were lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own table. He forbade this to the other pigs on the ground that it made them fat. And all the usual replacements, such as tools, nails, string, coal, wire, scrap iron, and dog biscuits. A stump of hay and part of the potato crop were sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week. So that year, the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers up at the same level. The rations, reduced in December, were reduced again in February, and lanterns in the stalls were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were putting on weight, if anything. One afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent, such as the animals had never smelled before, wafted across the yard from the little brew house which had been disused in Jones's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said that it was the smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper, but no warm mash appeared. And on the following Sunday, it was announced that from now onwards, all barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard had already been sown with barley, and the news soon leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily, with half a gallon for Napoleon himself, which was always served to him in the Crown Derby soup tureen. But if there were hardships to be borne, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had before. There were more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called a spontaneous demonstration. Okay. Well, let me finish this. The object of which was to celebrate the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. All right, the word spontaneous means it just sort of happens. It was unplanned. But to have a once a week spontaneous demonstration, what's spontaneous about that? Nothing. Nothing is the answer. Orwell is, having some fun here. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march around the precincts of the farm in military formation with the pigs leading. Then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, and then the poultry. We have a rigid class system suddenly in place here. I don't know if you've noticed, but now the pigs don't talk to the other animals. The other animals have to move out of the way when they meet a pig. Pigs get to wear green ribbons on Sunday. Now they're parading in military formation, which calls back to the Russian parades with the tanks and the missiles and the soldiers. But the pigs lead, then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, then the poultry. We have a clear pecking order here. The dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of all marched Napoleon's black cockerel. Boxer and Clover always carried between them a green banner marked with a hoof and horn and the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Afterwards, there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honor, and a speech by Squealer giving particulars of the latest increases in production of foodstuffs. And on occasion, a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were the greatest devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did when no pigs or dogs were near, that they wasted time and meant a lot of standing about in the cold, the sheep were sure to silence them with a tremendous bleating of, "4 legs good, 2 legs bad." But by and large, the animals enjoyed these celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded that, after all, they were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. So that, what with the songs, the processions, Squealer's lists of figures, the thunder of the gun, the crowing of the cockerel, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty, at least part of the time. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected unanimously. On the same day, it was given out that the fresh documents had been discovered, which revealed further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the Battle of the Cowshed by means of a stratagem, but he had been openly fighting on Jones's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces and had charged into battle with the words "Long live humanity" on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's back, which a few of the animals still remember to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. In the middle of the summer, Moses the Raven suddenly reappeared on the farm after an absence of several years. He was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked in the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say, solemnly pointing to the sky with his large beak. "Up there, just the other side of that dark cloud, you can see, there it lies, Sugar Candy Mountain, the happy country where the poor animals shall rest forever from our labors." He even claimed to have been there on one of his higher flights, and to have seen the everlasting fields of clover and the linseed cake and the lump sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. It was not right Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs towards Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about Sugar Candy Mountain were lies, and yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working, with an allowance of a gill of beer a day. So Moses is back. Remember that Moses represents the church, and so why would the communist leaders suddenly allow Moses to return to the farm and not eject him like they would have otherwise? Well, let's look. He's unchanged. He still does no work, and he talks in the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He says, up there, comrades, up there, just the other side of that dark cloud, you can see there it is, Sugar Candy Mountain, that happy country. So it's a sermon. He's preaching about heaven. Like Sugar Candy Mountain's clearly heaven. I think everybody sees that. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? Well, wasn't that the communists' original reason for wanting to get rid of church in the first place? That it was an opiate for the masses? That it taught them that they should suffer through their miserable lives and not worry about it because they could get to heaven one day? And what they really needed was a revolution to, make their lives in actuality better. And if their lives in actuality were better, they wouldn't need heaven. Well, if that was the old reasoning, then why have him back? Is it because the lives of the animals are now so terrible again that they need the hope of heaven? I think that's what Orwell's saying. And if you recall, Farmer Jones used to feed Moses with bread soaked in beer, and now, the pigs are giving him beer. Anyway, after his hoof had healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves that year. Apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill, there was a schoolhouse for the young pigs, which was started in March. Sometimes the long hours on insufficient food were hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. In nothing that he said or did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny than it had used to be. His great haunches seemed to have shrunken. The others said, Boxer will pick up when the spring grass comes on, but the spring came and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscles against the weight of some vast boulder, it seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except the will to continue. At such times, his lips were seen to form the words, I will work harder. He had no voice left. Once again, Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as a good store of stone was accumulated before he went on pension. Late one evening in the summer, a sudden rumor ran round the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down to the windmill, and sure enough, the rumor was true. A few minutes later, 2 pigeons came racing in with the news. Boxer's fallen! He's lying on his side and can't get up! About half the animals on the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer between the shafts of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his sides matted with sweat. A thin stream of blood had trickled out of his mouth. Clover dropped to her knees at his side. Boxer, she cried, how are you? It's my lung, said Boxer in a weak voice. It doesn't matter. I think you'll be able to finish the windmill without me. There's a pretty good store of stone accumulated. I had only another month or so to go in any case. To tell you the truth, I'd been looking forward to my retirement, and perhaps as Benjamin is growing old too, they will let him retire at the same time and be a companion to me. We must get help at once, said Clover. Run, somebody, and tell Squealer what has happened. All the other animals immediately raced back to the farmhouse to give Squealer the news. Only Clover remained, and Benjamin, who lay down at Boxer's side, and without speaking kept the flies off him with his long tail. After about a quarter of an hour, Squealer appeared, full of sympathy and concern. He said that Comrade Napoleon had learned with the very deepest distress of this misfortune to one of the most loyal workers on the farm, and was already making arrangements to send Boxer to be treated in the hospital in Willingdon. The animals felt a little uneasy at this. Except for Molly and Snowball, no other animal had ever left the farm, and they did not like to think of their sick comrade in the hands of human beings. However, Squealer easily convinced them that the veterinary surgeon in Willingdon could treat Boxer's case more satisfactorily than could be done on the farm. And about a half an hour later, when Boxer had somewhat recovered, He was, with difficulty, got on his feet and managed to limp back to his stall where Clover and Benjamin had prepared a good bed of straw for him. For the next 2 days, Boxer remained in the stall. The pigs had sent out a large bottle of pink medicine, which they had found in the medicine chest in the bathroom, and Clover administered it to Boxer twice a day after meals. This is probably Pepto-Bismol, which would have nothing to do with your lungs, but hey, placebo. In the evenings, she lay in his stall and talked to him, while Benjamin kept the flies off him. Boxer professed not to be sorry for what had happened. If he made a good recovery, he might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days that he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time that he had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his life to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was in the middle of the day when the van came to take him away. The animals were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig when they were astonished to see Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm building, braying at the top of his voice. It was the first time that they had ever seen Benjamin excited. Indeed, it was the first time that anyone had ever seen him gallop. "Quick, quick," he shouted. "Come at once, they're taking Boxer away." Without waiting for the orders from the pig, the animals broke off work and raced back to the farm building. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van drawn by 2 horses with lettering on its side and a sly-looking man in a low-crowned bowler hat sitting in the driver's seat. And Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded round the van. "Goodbye, Boxer," they chorused. "Goodbye." "Fools! Fools!" shouted Benjamin, prancing round them, stamping the earth with his small hoofs. "Fools! Do you not see what's written on the side of that van?" That gave the animals pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside, and in the midst of a deadly silence, he read, "Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal, kennel supplied. Do you not understand what that means? They're taking Boxer to the knackers." A cry of horror burst from all the animals. At this moment, the man on the box whipped up his horses and the van moved out of the yard at a smart trot. All the animals followed, crying out at the top of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began to gather speed. Clover tried to stir her stout limbs to a gallop and achieved a canter. "Boxer!" she cried. "Boxer! Boxer! Boxer!" And just at this moment, as though he had heard the uproar outside, Boxer's face, with the white stripe down his nose, appeared at the small window at the back of the van. "Boxer!" cried Clover in a terrible voice. "Boxer, get out! Get out quickly! They're taking you to your death!" All the animals took up the cry, "Get out, Boxer! Get out!" But the van was already gathering speed and drawing away from them. It was uncertain whether Boxer had understood what Clover had said, but a moment later, his face disappeared from the window, and there was the sound of a tremendous drumming of hooves inside the van. He was trying to kick his way out. The time had been when a few kicks from Boxer's hooves would have smashed the van to matchwood, but alas, his strength had left him, and in a few moments the sound of drumming hooves grew fainter and died away. In desperation, the animals began appealing to the 2 horses, which drew the van to stop. "Comrades, comrades," they shouted, "don't take your own brother to his death." But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set their ears back and quickened their pace. Boxer's face did not reappear at the window. Too late, someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the 5-barred gate, but in another moment, the van was through it and rapidly disappearing down the road. Boxer was never seen again. 3 days later, it was announced that he had died in the hospital at Willingdon, in spite of receiving every attention a horse could have. Squealer came to announce the news to the others. He had, he said, been present during Boxer's last hours. "It was the most affecting sight I have ever seen," said Squealer, lifting his trotter and wiping away a tear. "I was at his bedside at the very last, and at the end, almost too weak to speak, he whispered in my ear that his sole sorrow was to have passed on before the windmill was finished. 'Forward, comrades,' he whispered. 'Forward in the name of the rebellion! Long live Animal Farm! Long live Comrade Napoleon! Napoleon is always right!' Those were his last words, comrades." Here Squealer's demeanor suddenly changed. He fell silent for a moment, and his little eyes darted suspicious glances from side to side before he proceeded. It had come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated at the time of Boxer's removal. Some of the animals had noticed that the van which took Boxer away was marked horse slaughterer, and had actually jumped to the conclusion that Boxer was being sent to the knackers. It was almost unbelievable, said Squealer, that any animal could be so stupid. Surely, he cried indignantly, whisking his tail and skipping from side to side, surely they knew their beloved leader, Comrade Napoleon, better than that. But the explanation was really very simple. The van had previously been the property of the knacker and had been bought by the veterinary surgeon who had not yet painted the old name out. That was how the mistake had arisen. The animals were enormously relieved to hear this, and when Squealer went on to give further graphic details of Boxer's deathbed, the admirable care he had received, and the expensive medicines for which Napoleon had paid without a thought as to the cost, their last doubts disappeared, and the sorrow that they felt for their comrade's death was tempered by the thought that at least he had died happy. Napoleon himself appeared at the meeting on the following Sunday morning, and pronounced a short oration in Boxer's honor. It had not been possible, he said, to bring back their lamented comrade's remains for interment on the farm, but he had ordered a large wreath and to be made from the laurels in the farmhouse garden, and sent it down to be placed on Boxer's grave. And in a few days' time, the pigs intended to hold a memorial banquet in Boxer's honor. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims, "I will work harder," and "Comrade Napoleon is always right." Maxims, he said, which every animal would do well to adopt as his own. On the day appointed for the banquet, a grocer's van drove up from Lillingdon and delivered a large wooden crate to the farmhouse. That night there was a sound of uproarious singing, which was followed by what sounded like a violent quarrel and ended about 11 o'clock with a tremendous crash of glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse before noon the following day, and the word went round that from somewhere or other the pigs had acquired money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. That's a pretty tough chapter. So they took care of Boxer, right? They sent him in and got him all the medicine that he needed and everything. No, they didn't. If you read that chapter carefully and you look for what Orwell is saying between the lines, I mean, clearly the van said the knacker's a guy who takes the horses in particular, takes their bodies and boils them down. You make glue from the hooves and the bones and the joints. You sell the meat to the kennels to be food for the dogs. Like they would use all the bits of a dead animal. And clearly they sold Boxer. How do you know they sold Boxer? Well, it's not particularly hard to figure out. His body can't come back and be buried on the farm. Why? Because it doesn't exist. Where do they get the money to buy this crate of whiskey? They sold Boxer and bought whiskey, right? Like that's pretty clear. And I was so pissed at the book when I read that chapter the first time. I was like, what? And I think you're supposed to be outraged. Look at all that Boxer has done for this farm. Look at all he's done for all of the animals, and look at how he's treated in return. It says something about people in power and those that work for them, those that work tirelessly for them, and how they get treated. It's pretty rough, and Orwell's not pulling any punches. And had it not been for Benjamin, who was literate, no one would know. I mean, and even now they're tricked. Clearly Benjamin's not, but the rest of the animals are tricked into sort of believing what Napoleon is saying, because he has control of the media. He has control of the words and the language. All right, we got one chapter left. We'll do that one next time. Anybody who has comments or has questions, wants to leave them in the comments on the bottom, I'm happy to answer. Thanks.